There's something I've carried for a long time, and if I'm being honest, I never imagined I would stand here and talk about it. Some truths don't stay hidden because they're shameful. They stay hidden because revealing them changes lives. Sometimes silence feels like the safest choice. You convince yourself that protecting someone is more important than satisfying the world's curiosity. You tell yourself that people don't need to know everything, that some stories belong only to the people who live them. I believed that for a very long time. But there comes a moment when silence stops being protection and starts becoming a burden. You wake up realizing that every day you remain quiet, another misunderstanding takes root. Another assumption becomes accepted as fact. Another version of the story spreads further away from reality. And eventually you have to ask yourself a difficult question. Are you protecting someone, or are you allowing the truth to disappear forever? That question has followed me everywhere. It's been there in quiet moments, in conversations that ended too quickly, and in nights when sleep came easily to everyone else but not to me. Every time someone mentioned her, I heard a version of the story that felt incomplete. People spoke with certainty, even though certainty was the one thing they didn't have. They believed they knew who she was because they had seen fragments, moments captured in public, opinions repeated often enough to sound true, conclusions drawn from a distance, but people rarely understand what happens behind the scenes. They see outcomes without witnessing the countless decisions that created them. They celebrate victories without seeing the failures that came first. They judge people by a single chapter without realizing the book is still being written. That's one of the biggest lessons I've learned. Reality is almost always more complicated than the headlines. Human beings are infinitely more complex than the labels we attach to them. We love simple stories because they're easy to remember, but the truth is rarely simple. It's layered, it's uncomfortable. It forces us to question assumptions we've held for years. I didn't stay silent because I was afraid of criticism. If you spend your life building things that matter, criticism becomes part of the journey. I stayed silent because I believed that keeping this secret was an act of loyalty. I believed that some promises are worth more than applause, more than public approval, more than the satisfaction of setting the record straight. But time changes perspective. It has a way of showing you that some truths are not meant to remain locked away forever. They exist because someone, someday, needs to hear them. Not to create drama, not to rewrite history, but to remind us that behind every public image is a private reality, and behind every judgment is a story most people never took the time to understand. So today, for the first time, I'm choosing truth over silence, because some secrets protect the past, but the truth has the power to transform the future. Once you decide to tell the truth, you also have to accept that it may challenge everything people thought they knew. That's the difficult part. We all build stories in our minds about other people. We collect a handful of moments, a few photographs, a couple of headlines, maybe a short conversation, and somehow we convince ourselves we understand an entire human being. It's efficient, but it's rarely accurate. That's exactly what happened with her. Most people believed they knew her because they had seen the version she allowed the world to see. They saw confidence. They saw composure. They saw someone who always seemed to have the right words at the right time. From the outside, it looked effortless, almost as if life naturally unfolded in her favor. It was easy to assume she never struggled, never doubted herself, never questioned the path she was walking. But that wasn't the person I came to know. Away from the cameras, away from expectations, away from the endless opinions of strangers, she became someone entirely different. She laughed at the smallest, most unexpected things. She could spend hours thinking about a single idea, not because she wanted recognition, but because she genuinely wanted to understand it. She asked questions that most people were too busy to ask. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, it wasn't to impress anyone. It was because she believed every conversation should leave both people wiser than before. What surprised me most was her kindness. Not the kind of kindness people perform when they know someone is watching. The quiet kind, the invisible kind, the kind that never appears in headlines because it doesn't seek attention. She remembered details everyone else forgot. She noticed when someone in the room felt invisible. She had an incredible ability to make people feel seen without making a spectacle of it. Those moments changed my perspective more than any public achievement ever could. We live in a world that rewards visibility. We measure influence through numbers, applause, followers, and headlines. But some of the greatest things a person can do happen where no audience exists. They happen in private conversations, thoughtful gestures, and sacrifices that no one will ever record. Those are the moments that define character, even if history never acknowledges them. I realized that the world had mistaken confidence for certainty. They assumed strength meant never feeling fear. They believed success erased loneliness. But every person carries contradictions. The strongest people sometimes question themselves the most. The brightest smiles can hide exhausting battles. The calmest voices often belong to those who have weathered the loudest storms. She understood something that many never do. Your value isn't determined by how many people understand you. It's determined by whether you remain true to yourself when almost no one does. That kind of authenticity is rare because it asks for courage every single day. The more I watched her live by that principle, the more I realized how easy it is for society to confuse appearance with reality. We don't just misunderstand people, we often reduce them to convenient versions that fit our expectations. And when we do that, we miss the very qualities that make them extraordinary. The woman everyone thought they knew was only a reflection. The woman I came to know was the truth, and that truth was far more remarkable than anyone could have imagined. As I came to understand who she really was, something else became impossible to ignore. The qualities that impressed me most, her patience, her calmness, her ability to encourage everyone around her, didn't appear out of nowhere. They had been forged through challenges that almost no one ever saw. That's the strange thing about strength. People admire it, but they rarely ask what it cost to build. From the outside, her life seemed remarkably steady. She carried herself with confidence, met expectations, and somehow found the energy to lift other people up, even when the day had already taken everything out of her. If you only watched from a distance, you would have assumed she had everything under control. That's the illusion many of us create. We become so skilled at managing appearances that even those closest to us begin to believe we never struggle. But behind closed doors, there were moments that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew her. There were long pauses where she simply sat in silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because she was carrying more than words could express. There were nights when the weight of responsibility was so heavy that even sleep felt out of reach. There were decisions she had to make that no one else could make for her, and every choice carried consequences she was willing to bear alone. What amazed me was not that she faced difficult moments. Every person does. What amazed me was that she never allowed those moments to become an excuse for treating others poorly. She refused to let pain become bitterness. She refused to let disappointment erase compassion. Even on days when life offered her very little, she somehow found a way to give encouragement to someone else. That kind of resilience isn't something you can fake. It doesn't come from pretending everything is perfect. It comes from accepting that life is imperfect and choosing to move forward anyway. It comes from understanding that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something more important than fear deserves your attention. I remember thinking how easy it would have been for her to ask for sympathy. People would have understood. No one would have blamed her for stepping back, for saying she had reached her limit. But she wasn't interested in being admired for enduring hardship. She simply believed that every challenge carried a lesson, and every setback could become the foundation for something stronger. Watching that changed me in ways I didn't expect. It reminded me that innovation, progress, and achievement aren't built only through intelligence or talent. They're built through endurance. They're built by continuing to move when the path disappears, by believing in tomorrow even when today offers very little evidence that things will improve. The world often celebrates visible victories while overlooking invisible sacrifices. We applaud the finish line, but rarely notice the lonely miles that came before it. Yet those unseen moments are where character is truly shaped. They are where integrity is tested, where purpose is refined, and where a person quietly decides whether they will become smaller than their circumstances or greater because of them. She chose the second path every single time. She carried burdens she never announced, fought battles she never publicized, and made sacrifices that many people will never fully understand. Not because she wanted to be seen as extraordinary, but because she believed that doing the right thing didn't require an audience. And that is the kind of strength that changes lives. Not the strength the world applauds, but the strength that quietly refuses to surrender when no one is watching. After watching her carry so much without asking for recognition, I started to believe I understood the full picture. I thought I knew what had shaped her, what motivated her, and why she made the choices she did. But life has a remarkable way of reminding us that certainty is often just confidence wearing a disguise. No matter how closely you think you've observed someone, there is always another layer waiting to be uncovered. That moment arrived unexpectedly. It wasn't during a public event or in the middle of some dramatic scene. There were no cameras, no applause, and no grand announcement. It happened in the quiet where the most important conversations usually do. The room was still, the distractions had faded, and for the first time, there was no reason to pretend everything was fine. She looked at me with a calmness that almost hid the weight behind her eyes. Then she said something so simple that, at first, it didn't even sound extraordinary. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it carried years of untold experience. It wasn't just a sentence, it was the key to understanding every decision she had ever made. In that moment, I stopped seeing isolated events and started seeing the entire pattern. The choices that once seemed confusing suddenly made perfect sense. The sacrifices I had admired but never fully understood were connected by a purpose far greater than comfort or recognition. Every time she had stepped back instead of taking credit, every time she had chosen patience over pride, every time she had remained silent when she could have defended herself, it was never because she lacked strength. It was because she possessed enough strength to think beyond herself. That realization changed something inside me. We often assume that intelligence is about having the right answers. But real wisdom is knowing that every person is carrying information you don't have. The moment you accept that, you stop judging so quickly. You start asking better questions. You become curious instead of certain. That conversation forced me to confront something uncomfortable about myself as well. I realized that even with the best intentions, I had filled in the gaps with my own assumptions. I had interpreted silence as agreement, resilience as ease, and composure as proof that everything was under control. I had done exactly what so many others had done. We had mistaken what was visible for what was true. It was a humbling lesson. Progress, whether in technology, business, or life, begins with challenging assumptions. Every breakthrough starts when someone is willing to say, "What if we've been looking at this the wrong way?" That night, I wasn't redesigning a machine or solving an engineering problem. I was redesigning the way I understood another human being, and that turned out to be one of the most important discoveries I could have made. From that point forward, I couldn't return to the comfortable version of the story. Once you see the truth, you carry a responsibility that didn't exist before. You can ignore it for a while, but you can't unknow it. It changes the way you speak, the way you listen, and the way you see the people around you. That quiet conversation lasted only a short time, but its impact has never faded. It became the dividing line between what I believed and what I finally understood. Sometimes, the smallest conversation reveals the greatest truth, and once you hear it, your entire world is rewritten forever. After that conversation, I understood something I hadn't fully appreciated before. Knowing the truth and telling the truth are not always the same thing. There's a gap between the two, and sometimes that gap lasts far longer than anyone on the outside could ever understand. People often assume that if you remain silent, you must be hiding something for your own benefit. But silence can come from a very different place. Sometimes it is an act of respect, sometimes it is a promise, and sometimes it is the only way you know to protect someone who has already carried more than enough. So I chose not to speak. It wasn't an easy decision. In fact, it became more difficult with every passing day. I watched conversations unfold that only told half the story. I heard opinions presented as facts. I saw people draw conclusions based on fragments, unaware that the missing pieces changed everything. There were moments when I wanted to interrupt, to correct the record, to explain what had really happened. But every time I came close, I remembered why I had stayed quiet in the first place. Trust is one of the rarest things a person can earn. It isn't built through grand speeches or public declarations. It's built in quiet moments when someone shares something deeply personal, believing you will treat it with care. Once that trust is broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. I couldn't ignore that responsibility simply because speaking would have been easier for me. At the same time, silence has a cost. It asks you to carry questions you cannot answer and misunderstandings you cannot correct. It means accepting that some people will judge your decisions without ever knowing the reasons behind them. That isn't comfortable. Human nature wants to be understood. We want people to see our intentions, not just our actions. But life doesn't always offer that opportunity. Over time, I realized something else. Protecting someone should never mean allowing the truth to disappear forever. There comes a point when staying silent no longer serves the purpose it once did. Circumstances change, people grow, time creates distance, and with that distance comes perspective. The very secret that once needed protection can eventually become a lesson that deserves to be shared. That realization didn't happen overnight. It came slowly, through reflection, through experience, and through recognizing that the story was never just about one person. It was about all of us. It was about how quickly we judge, how confidently we assume, and how rarely we pause long enough to ask whether we're seeing the whole picture. Innovation teaches an important principle. When the evidence changes, your conclusions should be willing to change too. Holding on to an outdated assumption simply because it's familiar prevents progress. The same is true in life. Growth requires the courage to revisit old beliefs and admit that we may have misunderstood someone all along. So why speak now? Because the purpose has changed. This is no longer about defending a reputation or settling old questions. It's about preserving something far more valuable, the truth itself. If a story has the power to help people become more compassionate, more patient, and more willing to look beyond appearances, then keeping it hidden no longer feels like loyalty. It feels like withholding a lesson that the world genuinely needs. There is a time to protect a secret, and there is a time to reveal it. Wisdom is knowing the difference, and courage is acting when that moment finally arrives. And that brings us to the reason I could no longer remain silent. If you've listened this far expecting a shocking confession or a dramatic revelation that turns everything upside down, the truth is both simpler and far more powerful than that. The secret was never about scandal. It was never about betrayal, hidden ambition, or some carefully guarded deception. The real secret was that the person so many believed they understood had quietly become the reason so many others found the strength to keep moving forward, and almost no one ever knew. She never asked for recognition. In fact, she often stepped away from it. When something good happened, she redirected the attention toward the people around her. When something went wrong, she accepted more responsibility than most people thought was fair. That wasn't weakness. It was a conscious choice. She understood something that is becoming increasingly rare in a world driven by visibility. Lasting impact is not measured by how often your name is mentioned, but by how many lives are better because you were there. Looking back now, I realize I had been searching for a hidden event when the real revelation was hidden in plain sight. It wasn't one extraordinary moment that defined her. It was thousands of ordinary moments that almost everyone overlooked. A thoughtful conversation that changed someone's confidence. A quiet act of generosity that never appeared online. A decision to forgive when resentment would have been easier. a willingness to encourage someone else even while carrying her own unseen burdens. Those moments don't usually become headlines. Algorithms don't reward them. They aren't the stories people rush to share. But if you pay close attention, you'll discover that they're the moments that hold families together, inspire innovation, rebuild hope, and remind people they are not alone. Civilization doesn't move forward only because of groundbreaking inventions or bold ideas. It also moves forward because of ordinary people making extraordinary choices when no one is watching. That is the truth I wanted you to hear. We spend so much time searching for exceptional individuals that we sometimes overlook the exceptional qualities hiding inside everyday actions. We admire boldness, but underestimate kindness. We celebrate achievement, but forget integrity. We chase success, yet often ignore the quiet courage it takes to remain compassionate in a world that constantly rewards self interest. She taught me that real influence isn't about controlling attention, it's about earning trust. It's about showing up consistently, even when there is no applause waiting at the end. It's about choosing principles over popularity and purpose over praise. Those choices rarely create instant rewards, but over time they shape something far more valuable than public approval. They shape character. And maybe that's the lesson we all need right now. Every person you meet is carrying a story you cannot see. Every stranger has fought battles you'll never hear about. Every confident face may hide private doubts, and every quiet individual may possess extraordinary resilience. Imagine how differently we would speak to one another if we truly believed that. Imagine how many conflicts could be avoided, how many relationships could be restored, and how many opportunities for understanding we would finally recognize. So, if this story changes the way you see her, I hope it also changes the way you see everyone else. Don't rush to define people by a single moment, a public image, or someone else's opinion. Give them the space to be more than your first impression, because the greatest truths are rarely the loudest ones. They are revealed through patience, compassion, and the willingness to look beyond what everyone else is willing to see. The most remarkable people are often not the ones the world notices first. They are the ones whose quiet courage changes the world long before anyone realizes they were the reason hope never disappeared.